So hi everyone and welcome to Social Sciences class 7. So in the earlier class we learnt about how the Sultanate period began and what is it that contributed to India, to the society, what were its contributions, then how did we actually come to know about this period. So we know that there were chronicles that were written. We also have seen the monuments that gave us a little idea about the Sultan. Sultan is the one, those are kings, but they were known as sultans, hence the Sultanate period. The power structure was basically in Delhi, so that's why it's also called Delhi Sultanate. And as we learned that there were 5 dynasties, so we have done Khilji, we've done the first slave dynasty, that was Mamluk, and all these sultans, all these dynasties came from Afghanistan and Turkey. So most of them were Afghans and Turks. We also got introduced to a new religion called Islam, and there were those sultans started sajda, and there were revenue structures that were built, a lot of bloodshed. We also saw that there was no perfect line of succession. They did not follow any kind of rule. Most of them were all very, very violent, and they all believed in war. So let's start with the Delhi Sultanate part 2. So we will see what other dynasties we have left. So this is your chapter number 4. That one was your chapter number 3. And the pages are between 20 to 25. So I do hope that all of us are sitting with our text. So let's begin, because we know that there was a king which died, and then we started with the Tugla dynasty. So it was Khilji who died. Khilji dynasty came to an end, and Khilji was very, very famous for the Padmavat. So Tughlaq dynasty was between 1320 to 1414. And this was the most important dynasties of the Delhi Sultanate. Why? Because this was the only dynasty which ruled for 100 years. And remember, the other dynasties that we did in Delhi Sultanate part 1, they were very, very short termed, like Razia Sultan only for 4 years. So, but we did see a woman ruler even in those times. So there were 2 famous rulers in Tughlaq dynasty. The first one was Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and the second one was Firoz Shah Tughlaq. So Firoz Shah Tughlaq is more famous than Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So let's go on to the first one. So the founder of this Tughlaq dynasty was Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, and he was there between 1320 to 1325. He was a competent and an able ruler, and he was the first sultan to make sure that the farmers are not taxed very lightly and also are not taxed very heavily. He was the first one who started building canals for the agriculture. He thought of the farmers, because farmers were the main revenue givers to the state treasury. So in all, if you see, he was a competent, he was an able, and he was also a generous, able ruler. He insisted that whatever extra income the nobles were getting from the Iktaq. So Iktaq is the military commander who governs the territory, and the lands were called Iktaz, and whoever held that land was called Iqtadars. So this was Iqta and Iqtadar. That was the policy that was started by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, and he said that whatever extra income these Iqtadar was getting from the Iqtas, they need to be deposited with the government. So in earlier times, all the Iqtas that were earned, they only were pocketing the nobles. So he started that everything beyond the Iqtas have to be deposited with the government. He was the first one to frame regulations for the famine relief. So whenever there was a famine, so obviously because of the famine, the farmers could not give any treasure or any money or any revenue to the government. So he was the first one who thought of this, and he started regularizing that if the farmers are not able to give anything, it is absolutely fine, and they have to be either taxed lightly or they have to have given no taxes. So he was an able, competent and also a generous ruler. So this is the city of Tughlaqabad that Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is famous for. It is now in ruins, but you can still go and enjoy and have a picnic there. So this is the city that he built. Okay, so after Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, we have Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the second ruler of the Tughlaq dynasty. He wanted to rule not only India but also the entire Central Asia. So he's just like Alauddin Khilji, who wanted to be the second Alexander. So if you have to have a conquest of another continent, another country, then you have to have a very strong army. So he was also a great scholar of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine and science. So which means now that Tughlaq dynasty has come, they are better rulers, they are better scholars than the earlier rulers. Remember, they started with the slave dynasty. Now these are all royal families that have come. Ibn Battuta from Morocco has written an account of his rule, and the Sultan appointed him as the Qazi of Delhi for several years because of Battuta's intelligence. So Ibn Battuta is one who has given a beautiful account of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's reign, and he was so well versed in writing that even the Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq appointed him as the Qazi. So Qazi is basically a religious priest. So everyone who is scholarly is appointed as the Qazi, and especially if he knows more about religion. Battuta was sent to China as the Sultan's envoy to the Mongol ruler. So this is how Battuta looked like, and he was sent to China, okay, as an envoy, so as an ambassador. Now according to Battuta, what Battuta says is that he was the Sultan was a mixture of opposites, and we are going to just read why is he called just the mixture of opposites. So why? Because he plans many schemes, but he wants to implement all these schemes without looking through the pros and cons, and that is why all his schemes failed. Now we are going to see what are the experiments or what are the plans that he made, and they all failed. So whatever he thought, his schemes were good, but they were not well thought of. They were not discussed before the implementation. He just comes across a scheme and he just wants to implement it. So the first experiment that he started was the transfer of the capital. So the capital was actually in Delhi, and in 1326 he decides that he is going to change the capital from Delhi to Devagiri. Now he felt, Devagiri is in Maharashtra, that is how it looks, that's a fort in Maharashtra. He felt that he would be able to control and administer the empire better, as Devagiri was the central place, while Delhi was far away from South India. And there was a constant threat to Delhi from the Mongols, while Devagiri was a safe place. So he thinks that if he wanted to control the southern part of India, he has to be in the central part of India. So he starts asking the people of Delhi to shift to Devagiri, because that's going to be a new capital with bag and baggage. Now, how does it turn to be a mess? So he orders them to go on the way. There was no food, there was no water, so most of them died, especially the children died on the way. The people who actually were able to go and stay in Devagiri, they found there were no houses, there was nothing to welcome them. Now, as said earlier, Mongols were always invading Delhi. And now that the capital had shifted from Delhi to Devagiri, Mongols thought there is no control over Delhi, there's nobody who's ruling, so might as well go back and start invading. So there was a lot of invasion from the Mongols back in Delhi. And that is when he decided and he thought that this was not a good idea. And also, when he says that it's not a good idea, he tells the people who were already in Devagiri now to go back to Delhi and start the long, arduous journey again. Again, because of those hardship, no water, no rest, no food, most of the people died from weakness or fatigue, and only few remained who went to Delhi and settled all over again. Now, when he starts saying that you have to move from Devagiri, even the rulers in the south thought that maybe he's a very, very weak ruler. That is why he's not able to control Delhi and he's not even able to control Devagiri. So that is what happened. Without a well thought planning, he just starts implementing his schemes. The second scheme that he had was token currency policy. So there was a shortage of silver in the entire world at that point of time. So because of the shortage of silver, the Sultan says, okay, we are going to introduce two kinds of coins. One would be brass and the other one would be copper. So this copper and brass currency was introduced into the market. Now, if you wanted to exchange the brass and the copper coin with gold and silver, you could go to the state treasury and change it. So the people thought that even if now the silver is not a very valuable currency, but later on gold and silver are more precious metal than copper and brass. So what they did was they started going and exchanging these currencies to gold and silver. So the masses, the common people had a lot of gold and silver coins, whereas the state treasury was only full of copper and brass. Also, the commoners started minting these copper and brass coins, and there was nobody who could see, there was no officer appointed by the Sultan to oversee this corruption, this malpractice. So finally, Sultan thinks through this policy and knows that he went wrong again, and he says that it has to be discontinued, and this token currency of copper and brass for day-to-day transactions was stopped. So the illegal mining also stopped, but the market by that time was flooded with brass and copper. And because there was only brass and copper and the state treasury was absolutely bereft of gold and silver, even the foreign traders, they refused. They said, we are not going to trade in copper and brass. What we want is silver and gold. And remember, the silver and gold was not there in the state treasury. So this was again a massive and a major failure of his policy. Then we know that the Doab area is one area which was very fertile, and this was one area where you had a lot of fertile agriculture products that came into the market. So this area was the one that gave the maximum revenue to the state treasury. So the ruler, the Sultan, thinks through and says that, okay, because Doab has a lot of fertile land, so I am going to tax them higher. And he started this taxation. He raised the taxation there, little realizing that when he raised that taxation, that time Doab area was suffering from a severe famine. So when you have famine, there is only disease and there's no land tilling happening. And most of the farmers by that time had abandoned their land. So there was nobody working on the land, there was no water, there was only famine. And because the farmers were so angry at this policy that they started a revolt against the Sultan. So this policy of taxation in Doab, when it was famine and there was nobody who could produce that yield, this order had also to be taken back. So three policies which were in a sense good, but they were not well planned, they were not well thought, and that is why it failed. Now, the last one was expedition into Khorasan and Karachi. So these were areas which were far off in Afghanistan, and it was very, very difficult to go and militarily conquer them. But he still went, and all through his life he started trying to control the areas which were not in his control and forgot that Delhi was the one that was his capital. So it was his bad decision that all his life he continued to fight the revolts that happened in the south. And that is why, because of frequent wars, he lost the faith of the common people. And that's how this era comes to an end. Now we have Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who was a cousin. So remember, now also you do not see the son ruling it. Firoz Shah Tughlaq was one ruler who thought that, okay, because the Muslim clergy is the religious head, they had no say in the previous rule. So Firoz Shah Tughlaq thought maybe the previous ruler became weak because the clergy was not supporting. So he started supporting and gifting Jagirs to the clergy, and he started imposing Islamic laws in the country. And due to this decision, the ulemas were the religious priest that was there in Islam, and they started interfering in the administration of the kingdom. So basically, more than the Sultan, these clergies became more powerful, and they started dictating the terms to the Sultan. He was an ideal ruler, and he was also a welfare ruler, as we call it. He always believed in charity, and that is why we say that Firoz as a reformer. He also built canals and many new cities. He was a learned man, and he was the one who translated the text of Sanskrit into Arabic and Persian, because that was their language, and it was felt that the Sanskrit texts were not read because of the difference in the language. So he's the one who translated into Arabic and Persian. So a great reformer and a great ruler. Now after Firoz Shah Tughlaq dies, we come to the Lodi dynasty. And Lodi dynasty, Bahlul Lodi was the first Afghan, and he was the first one to have found the Lodi dynasty. He was also a generous and a pious ruler. Pious is somebody who believes in religion and who believes in the supremacy of God. He appointed all the Afghans as governors. He thought, because I'm an Afghani, and if we had more of Turkish nobles, they are not going to accept my rule. So instead of the Turkish nobles, he started appointing his own countrymen, Afghans, as governors. And then comes Sikandar Lodi. He was the most powerful ruler of Lodi dynasty. So he conquers Jaunpur, Bihar, and he also accepted a treaty with Bengal. So now he's going further east and trying to make India a consolidated empire. He was the one who founded the city of Agra and made it his capital. So you can see beautiful monuments in the city of Agra, constructed later by Mughals and now by Lodis. He initiated many reforms in the agriculture, and as the other rulers tried to control the prices of the daily commodities. Abdullah has written a book on him called Tariq-e-Daud, and that's one book which says highly of the Sultanate. He initiated many reforms in agriculture and controlled the prices of commodities, and this book speaks highly of him. And after Sikandar Lodi comes Ibrahim Lodi, but unfortunately he was a very weak ruler. So all the Delhi Sultanate, all the 5 dynasties that we came across, all gone now, and now we will have Mughals. So why do you think that the Delhi Sultanate fall? So the first one was that the army was not very well organized. Every time they were only fighting, they were not trying to consolidate what they had. There were through and through invasions by Mongols, which they had no idea how to make their army strong and stop those invasions. They were not very tolerant of Hindus, so Hindus were always against the sultans. after every few years, there was a change of dynasties, which also resulted in their downfall, because there was not one dynasty which could rule for a longer period. There was, as I said, no definite law of succession. Whoever was strong, whoever could kill somebody would be the ruler. And most of the nobles at that point of time were weak. Why? Because they thought that pleasure seeking and opportunities are more important than making a good and a strong ruler. So they were merrymaking, they were very fond of alcohol and women, but they were not very militarily strong. So that is why this Sultanate period falls, and then the other very, very glorious era of Mughals come in. So I do hope that you understood the reasons that the Sultanate period fell, and all the 5 dynasties, and who were the rulers, who was the weaker one and who was the stronger one, what is the policy of blood and iron, etc. So thank you so much, and bye-bye.